Hello and welcome back to online video classes by Konnur English Medium School. In the last session, we were discussing the first poem from the first part of your English textbook, To a Pair of Sarus Cranes, written by Manmohan Singh. Talking about the life of Sarus birds, especially highlighting one quality among them, that is fidelity. We were looking at a poem written by Manmohan Singh, where he narrates a very sad incident of how a male bird gets shot by bird hunters and how the female bird, her mate, her companion, reacts to that incident. So we finished two verses in the last session. The first verse was, the male was shot as he necked to pull the reluctant sun out from the rim of horizon. So the poem began with a gunshot where bird hunters appeared on the scene early morning when Sarus cranes had gathered to witness the beautiful scene of the sunrise, when they fire a bullet and kill a male bird. She flew crying as he was picked up, hands and jaws, and a proud neck was humbled to lie like dirty linen in a coarse washing bag. So hearing the gunshot, she flew away in terror up in the sky, and then the bird hunters appeared on the scene. They approached the spot where the male crane was lying dead, and then they picked it up without any emotion, without any respect for its life or its majestic beauty. They treated it like a dirty piece of cloth and then put it down in a coarse washing bag, and they left. So we had finished these two verses, so we will continue from the third verse. And this is the third verse. She circled the sky in movements of grace over his disgraceful end. She circled the sky. She was circling in the sky while all this was happening, while the bird hunters appeared on the scene and they picked up the male bird, the dead male bird, and then they threw it down in a coarse washing bag. Washing bag, it's just it's a big, a jute bag kind of a thing, which is used to carry maybe laundry or such other things. They had carried it. Maybe they used the same bag for hunting Sarus cranes every time. So it was looking very dirty, and it was very coarse. Coarse in the sense, the texture of the surface of the bag, the material of the bag was not smooth, it was very rough. So in such a bag they threw down the male Sarus crane into the bag and they left, right? So when all this was happening, she was circling up in the sky. She was a helpless bird. She couldn't come down and fight these men, right? So she was circling at a safe distance up in the sky, but she was watching. She was observing everything that they were doing to her mate. So, how were her movements? Her movements were graceful. They were elegant. They were beautiful. But what was happening down there, right on the ground, was something disgraceful. Something that was dishonorable. So, the poet very wisely brings out the contrast here. Even though her state of mind was nowhere in complement to the beauty of her being a Sarus crane, but her movements were still beautiful. So very beautifully she was flying in circles up in the sky, while her mind was tormented in a complete state of shock, looking at her male partner getting carried away by the bird hunters. So her movements of grace over his disgraceful end, that's how the poet puts it down in two simple lines. So this is the written explanation of that particular verse. Let's read it, and you also need to make note of it. The female crane flew in circles in the sky right above the spot where her mate was shot, observing as the hunters picked him up and prepared to leave. The poet says her movements were graceful, while the male's end was disgraceful. This means that she looked elegant and beautiful in flight, while the male crane was shot and killed in a dishonorable and shocking way. So that is the third verse and the explanation for it. Now we will look at the fourth one. The next verse is, the killers went away and she returned to the death scene with grief that inscribed its intensity in dots and pits, like the Morse code of birds' sorrow transmitted to the air. So this is what she did after she came down, after the hunters left. How did she react? First, she patiently waited for them to leave because she knew there was nothing for her to do until they left. And then she comes down to the spot where the incident had taken place, where her mate, the male bird, was shot down. Was the bird still there? It was not there. They had taken it, they had carried it away with them, the bird hunters. They had taken it in what? A coarse, dirty washing bag, yes? So, the killers went away and she returned to the death scene with grief. That inscribed, what inscribed here? The grief that inscribed its intensity in dots and pits, like Morse code of bird sorrow transmitted to the air. Let's see what this verse means. When the hunters left, she came down to the ground and to the spot where her mate had died. She was grief struck. Yes, she was grief struck. What does grief struck mean? That means that she was in deep sorrow. Yes, she was mourning the death of her mate, and made short and long sounds. So how does the poet know? I mean, is he imagining all this, or did he actually see an incident happening like this one? What do you think? Is he imagining, or did this incident actually happen before his eyes? Because he is talking about the female crane as if he could understand it, more than anybody else could, as if he knew her personally. How is it possible that he knows that she is feeling very deep sorrow for the death of her mate? How does he know that? Well, everything that happened here in this poem, the incident he is talking about, is real. Manmohan Singh was a nature observer, yes, and he was a bird lover. He spent a lot of time in his life watching birds and studying them. So he made notes of everything that he studied and observed. So this incident happened in real, and he knows for sure that the female crane reacted exactly the way he has described it here. So she comes down to the spot where the male bird had been shot dead, and she was grief struck. He could see her experience that deep sorrow because she was reacting in a certain way. That could mean only one thing, and that is grief. What is grief? Deep sadness, yes? She was very, very sad, and she made short and long sounds, stretching her neck out as though appealing to the sky. So miserable she felt, so sad she was, and so helpless she felt at that moment. She just stretched her neck upward to the sky and made some long and short sounds, the kind of sounds the Sarus cranes make. These sounds were very peculiar. They were not the normal sounds the birds make, when they are moving around and then going about their life. These sounds were different from the normal Sarus crane sounds. So it was as if she was appealing to the sky for somebody to come and help her, for somebody to come and then save the male Sarus crane that was shot already, that was killed. She's behaving in a way that shows desperation, that shows a higher degree of helplessness here. So she made some kind of sounds that sounded like she was crying out to the sky for somebody to come and help her. It was not possible to know what exactly she was saying. So the poet, as he sees her reacting like that, he knows that she is deeply suffering from what just happened there. He also knows that she is trying to appeal to somebody for help, but he cannot understand her language. He cannot understand the bird's language, the Sarus crane's language. So it was not very clear what exactly she was saying with those short and long sounds, but it was certain that those sounds were expressions of grief. But what he was certain about was that those sounds were an expression of intense grief, yes, sadness and desperation over the death of her mate. So although her language was not something he could understand, but he knew what it meant. It meant that she was very, very sad about the death of her mate, which is the male Sarus crane. Now the poet uses a term here which is Morse code, yes, M-O-R-S-E, Morse code. Morse code is actually a code. What is a code? Code is a kind of a language, yes, a way of saying things which not everybody can understand. So if there is a code called a Morse code, only people who have studied that code will understand how to interpret it. Yes, so Morse code is a distress language. It was used back in those days when there was, the technology that we have today was not available. So sailors, for example, who went on the sea for weeks together, when they met with some sort of accident in the middle of the ocean, it could be a storm or something else, and they had to send signals to people on the shore to come and help them. So they used a kind of code, coded language. They used a device that could transmit the Morse code, and the device actually worked this way. You would tap a particular thing on the device that would make sounds. So depending on the number of times you press it, whether you press it for a long time or a short time, whether you create a short sound or a long sound, based on that people would interpret the message. It's a coded message. So this is Morse code basically. So you either make sounds, a combination of short and long sounds, or you use light, yes, flashlights for example. The way you click the button of the flashlight, whether you show a long beam or a short beam, whether you flash it quickly or then you make the light appear for a longer moment, depending on the combination of those things, if you knew how to understand Morse code, you would interpret the message. Morse code is basically a kind of a coded language. So here he uses that term Morse code because the way the female Sarus crane was reacting by making short and long sounds, looking up, stretching her neck and then looking up towards the sky as if appealing to somebody for help, it looked like she was trying to transmit a message in her own coded language. A message that expressed her grief, a message that called for help, that looked like that, as if she was using a kind of bird's Morse code. So that is the idea behind using the term Morse code in the verse there, in that stanza. So Morse code is a kind of coded language in which letters of the alphabet are transmitted in combinations of short and long sounds or light signals for sending messages. So it's used in distress situations. The Morse code of bird's sorrow here refers to the sounds of grief of the male crane made after her mate was killed and taken away. This is compared to Morse code because she was saying something in combinations of short and long sounds. So that's all about that verse. She comes down and then she reacts in a way that says that she was in deep pain because of that incident that happened, that her mate is dead, and then she reacted by making some sort of short and long sounds as if she was appealing for help. That is the fourth stanza. Now we will look at the next stanza or the verse. With her beak she kissed a few feathers, picked the ones that wind had not taken away. and sat to hatch the blood-stained feathers into a toddling chick. So the female bird, after she comes down and after she makes some long and short sounds as if appealing to somebody for help, she continues to react in a very strange way. And here we see her gathering some of the feathers that had been left behind after the male bird was carried away by the bird hunters. So what does she do with those feathers? Yes. Now pay very attention here. Pay good attention here. She's a bird, and then whatever is going on in her mind, yes, it's about the loss that was inflicted upon her by the hunters by killing her mate. So if her actions seem very weird or strange or irrational, it's not the actions that matter, it's her expression or how she is feeling about what just happened is important here, because that tells us a lot about Sarus cranes. She is at a crime scene. Some feathers of the male crane have fallen to the ground as the hunters hauled him over and dropped him into the dirty bag unceremoniously. So some of his feathers, the male bird's feathers, they have fallen down to the ground, while the hunters very roughly, without any respect, carelessly and in a hurry of course, they picked up the bird and then dropped him into that dirty linen bag. In that course of action, many of the bird's feathers, they fell down to the ground. Now while the male bird had been taken away, those feathers are still there on the spot where he was lying. So she looks at those feathers filled with emotion. She's come down and she's looking around. She sees those feathers, and even though she's a bird, she's smart enough to know that those feathers belong to her mate, her companion, whom the bird killers just killed. She touches a few of them with her beak as if kissing them. She moves around, touching her beaks to those feathers as if she is trying to kiss those feathers. What does it express? It expresses how dearly she loved him, how dearly she loved her companion, her mate. It is conspicuous. What is conspicuous? Very obvious. Yes, quite understandable. It is conspicuous that she has great love for the male who was killed. So her actions like that, they clearly show us that she loved him very dearly. The wind has carried away some of the feathers, and those that remain are stained in blood. Among those feathers which were left behind, which had fallen down to the ground, many had already been carried away by the wind, because feathers are very light, right? They are not heavy, they are very light, and the blowing wind has already carried away some of those feathers. Only those remain which are heavy because of the blood on them. The others have already been flown away by the wind. Those have remained back, which had been stained in blood. Yes, there was a gunshot. Yes, there was injury on the male bird's body. So the blood that flew down his body, it stained some of the feathers, and those feathers are little heavier now because of the blood on them. So those remain behind, and she is kissing those feathers, and she is gathering them. Yes, she is collecting them. She's making a small pile of those feathers. She is so lost in grief and so desperate to bring him back that she sits on those feathers like she would sit on her eggs to help them hatch. So after she gathers those blood-stained feathers, she sits on them. She is a female bird. I mean, she lays eggs, and she is very familiar with helping those eggs hatch. She gives them some heat, she warms them up, and then after some time those eggs hatch, and then chicks come out of those eggs. So she thinks, if she can do that to these feathers, maybe the male bird will come back. Yes, as a toddling chick. Yes, as a baby he would come back, believing that he would come back as a toddling chick. So that is her idea behind gathering those feathers and sitting on them as if to trying to hatch them. We all know that this sounds very stupid. I mean, even for a bird, it's something that is stupid. Birds should know that feathers cannot be hatched into chicks. Only eggs can be hatched into chicks. But here, maybe her mind is not working the way it normally should, because she is in a complete shock and she is suffering from intense grief, sorrow over the death of her mate. So she is not thinking very clearly here. So it's quite understandable why she is behaving like this. She is just trying to bring her companion back, even if as a toddling chick, even if as a baby bird. She's fine with that, but she wants him to come back, and that is why she is trying to hatch his feathers into a toddling chick. So, like I explained, her actions may be irrational, but they are completely justifiable considering the state of emotion she is in presently. Now we will go to the last verse of this poem, which is very important. It is this verse, or this stanza, where we see what actually happens to the female bird in the end and how it happens. And that stanza is also very important from the point of poetry writing, because there are a couple of very interesting literary devices used by Manmohan Singh. Let's look at the last stanza. A wave of the seas she had never seen came to her from far away, and it carried her to him. She went away beyond Hume's words, beyond the legends and fables of human love. That's it, that's the last stanza. Yes, let's read it again before we get an explanation about them, about the lines here. A wave of the seas she had never seen came to her from far away, and it carried her to him. She went away beyond Hume's words, beyond the legends and fables of human love. Right? So this stanza describes the tragic end of the female crane. So if I have to explain this stanza in just one line, in one short line, what would I say? I would simply say she dies. Yes? She dies of grief. She dies of the sorrow she experienced over the death of her mate. But how does the poet put it? Yeah, he doesn't put it in just that simple way. Yes, let's read it. The poet talks about a wave of the seas, but Sarus cranes do not live in coastal regions. So he says a wave of seas came to her. A wave of seas. A wave of seas, well, Sarus cranes don't live around coastal areas. Yes, we talked about it. They live in wetlands. Close to areas which are flooded most of the times, where there is presence of water, constant presence of water, but they don't live near coastlines, they don't live near seas. So there is no question of a wave of seas coming to her. So, but he says so, a wave of the seas came to her. They are mainly found in land. He also says that she had never seen a wave. So he is talking about a wave of the seas, and he also says a wave of the seas that she had never seen before. Of course, Sarus cranes would have never seen a wave of seas because they don't live in areas close to the seas or the oceans. If she lived near the sea, she would have seen a wave, yes? So the wave of the seas is clearly a metaphor for something else here. So this is what is important to understand. He is using a metaphor for a wave of the seas here. A metaphor implies something else, right? It's not the literary meaning of those words. So what is the poet suggesting here by saying a wave of the seas? That's what we need to dissect and understand. The sea has been used as a metaphor for death by many poets. Now remember this, sea has been used as a metaphor for death by many poets, not just Manmohan Singh. Many poets use sea as a metaphor for death. So that means there are poems that talk about seas, but they actually talk about death by talking about seas. So that's what metaphor is. You talk about something, but you mean something else. Like we talked about the moving hand. Yes, the moving hand, that actually was a reference to the God writing the fate, the destiny of us. So similarly, a wave of the seas implies something else, and it is death actually, like many poets have used it in their poems. The sea is said to separate this world from the next, the living from the dead. So why do poets make use of the seas as a metaphor for death? It's because it's believed that the seas separate the living from the dead. This belief has been an old one. So today we don't believe that. Yes, maybe we find it even funny or amusing or silly. But people believe that if you cross to the oceans, yes, if you went beyond the oceans, then you would go to the other world where the dead lived. Yes. So seas were considered as the passage between the living and the dead, and that is why probably they represented death. The same metaphor is employed by Manmohan Singh here. A wave of the seas she had never seen represents great grief which eventually kills the female crane. But she goes a step further, and then he employs another reference there. Yes, a wave of seas, he doesn't refer to death directly. By saying that, he says that she suffered intense grief. And it also makes sense because he says, wave of the seas she had never seen. So that means a kind of intense feeling of sorrow or grief that she had never experienced before. That's what came to her. So the first three lines of this stanza suggest that death came to her as she was unable to cope with the loss of her mate or companion. In other words, she died of intense grief, a wave she had never known before, the kind of feeling that she had never experienced before. That painful feeling ultimately became the reason for her own death. The grief killed her, but united her with him in the other world, carried her to him. Yes, that's what Manmohan Singh says. The wave came and it carried her to him. While it all looks, quite physical here, it's not physical. These are all references, made through the literary devices of metaphor. So that intense feeling of pain, that sorrow, that caused her the death. And by doing that, she was united with her mate in the other world. So that means she went to that place where the male had gone. That means the place where the dead live. The poet makes a reference to A.O. Hume here, as he says, beyond Hume's words. One of the founders of the Indian National Congress, but Hume was also a notable ornithologist, a person who studies birds. In fact, he has been called the father of Indian ornithology. Now, you must remember this name A.O. Hume from your history textbook. We know that A.O. Hume was one of the founders of the Indian National Congress during the British era, right? A.O. Hume was not just the co-founder of the Indian National Congress, but he was also a notable ornithologist. And ornithologists are people who study birds, yes? So, as a science, it's not like they just sit there and then click photographs and then take some notes. They take serious interest in their life. They study their behavior, their migratory behavior, their nesting behavior, so their diet, everything. They are called ornithologists. In fact, A.O. Hume has been known as the father of Indian ornithology. So maybe there were not very notable people before him who studied ornithology. So he is considered the father of Indian ornithology. So why is Manmohan Singh making a reference to A.O. Hume here? Is because A.O. Hume is connected with the study of birds. So we will come to know more about that in the next slide. He co-authored a book called Game Birds of India, Burma and Ceylon, which was published in the year 1881. A game bird is a bird that is hunted for sport. So A.O. Hume, co-author, right? So he wrote a book he was not the only author of that book, there was someone else as well. So in this book, which is named Game Birds of India, Burma and Ceylon. Ceylon is Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was called Ceylon before. And Burma, which is now known as Myanmar. So he's talking about the birds which are commonly hunted in these three countries. That is India, modern day Myanmar and modern day Sri Lanka. So about these birds, A.O. Hume with another person has authored a book, and that is the name of the book, Game Birds of India, Burma and Ceylon. So in this book, A.O. Hume has made many observations, put them down, yes, and then you also see references to these birds, Sarus cranes, which we are talking about here. So what words A.O. Hume wrote in the book, the Game Birds of India, Burma and Ceylon? The words that were related to Sarus cranes. This is what A.O. Hume said. He said that the female Sarus crane, upon the death of her mate, gradually pines away in grief and dies. And until death, she stays near the place where her mate was killed for weeks together, calling constantly. So Manmohan Singh is not the only one who has studied Sarus cranes. So A.O. Hume, the father of Indian ornithology, has made very careful observations about these birds too. So in that book he writes that the female birds, yes, when they lose their male birds, their male partners, they sometimes sit there at that spot where the male was killed for weeks together. And then they pine away, yes, in that sorrow. They forget about eating and going about their usual life. They sit there. Sometimes they call, they make calls, they cry, they kind of appeal for help, and then they die. They just die in sorrow, in grief. This is an observation that A.O. Hume himself made in that book. So these are the Hume's words. What are the Hume's words? These are the Hume's words. These Hume's words are also given at the end of the poem in your textbook. You can also take a look at them. So, and until the death, she stays near the place where her mate was killed for weeks together. So this is what is Manmohan Singh is referring when he says she went away beyond Hume's words. But why does he say beyond Hume's words? The phrase she went away beyond Hume's words suggests that the female crane showed such deep love for her mate that even Hume, who studied birds with passion, would have been amazed. So what Manmohan Singh observed now was far more intense expression of grief and sorrow than what Hume observed in that book. So that's what he means when he says she went away beyond Hume's words. And he also says that the love of the female crane was far more inspirational than any of the legends and fables of human love. He says, beyond Hume's words, beyond the legends and fables of human love. So that means her love for the mate was far more inspirational than even the love stories, the great love stories of human beings. So this way, Manmohan Singh, in a very short poem, makes us realize the situation, the condition of Sarus cranes these days, how they are mercilessly hunted, and how wonderful personalities these birds have, and their qualities, that special quality of fidelity which has no regard in the hearts of the bird hunters. So they are being poached in large numbers, and their numbers have dwindled. Only 10 to 15,000 have remained in India at the moment. So while we read this poem, we do feel, right, we do feel that we ought to do something about them. Well, at least what we can do is we create awareness among people that these species, yes, these species and many other species, they are important because they are wonderful. We are not just the only rightful owners of this planet Earth. There are others as well. So that's the message probably Manmohan Singh wants to give us here. So read this poem again. It's a simple poem. I explained the stanzas in detail. You can replay this video and then pause wherever you need to make notes, and then if you don't understand something, as always, you can reach me on my phone number, or you can contact me on WhatsApp, or leave comments under the YouTube video. I will try to reply. So that's all for today. I will see you next time with another chapter from your textbook.